Take a moment and close your eyes. Think of the number of times you have relayed information today to someone who was not in front of you. This may have included writing a note or letter, making a phone call, sending a fax, an email, or a text message. Can you imagine not having any of these methods by which to communicate at a distance? Please open your eyes and let's take a brief journey together as we explore distant communication through the use of the telegraph. From the beginning of time, people have had a need to relay information to one another. While the content of information has varied, so have the methods of communication. The earliest documented form of distant communication was used by Native American peoples and involved the use of smoke signals, where a person would use a fire to create smoke and waft the smoke by moving a blanket over the billows of smoke to create different sized smoke clouds. While this proved to be an effective method at the time, difficulties like weather would impede its usefulness. In addition, the people with whom you were communicating would be required to know what each symbol represented in order for the message to be interpreted. Just as people have changed over the past few centuries, so has the need for a more effective means of distance communication. Today's information age began with the telegraph. The word telegraph is used to describe the conveying of intelligence to a distance by means of signs. Some form of a telegraph system has been in existence since the middle of the 17th century, when flag signals were introduced by the Duke of York, Admiral of the English fleet during the Dutch War of 1665. This method of telegraphy allowed ships at sea to communicate with one another, primarily to direct the maneuvers of the fleet. As time progressed, there were advancements in the flag signals, the introduction of a windmill-type signal system known as the semaphore, and later the introduction of the electric telegraph. For thousands of years, people dreamed of being able to exchange messages further than they could see or hear. But this meant discovering something that would work independently of sight or sound. That something was electricity, discovered in the mid-18th century. The core technology of the telegraph involves sending electrical charges down lengths of wire. The first step towards discovering how to do this was taken by the English scientist Stephen Gray. Stephen Gray first discovered conductivity on July 2, 1729, when he assembled the experiment using silk thread and poles to hold the thread above the ground. This attempt proved to be successful, and thus conductivity was born. With the development of the electric battery and the use of conductivity, other inventors were intrigued to define ways in which communication could travel quickly through space. In 1804, Catalan scientist Campillo devised a system that utilized 25 wires to transmit a current through electrolysis of water. The following 35 years would consist of multiple discoveries which would eventually be used by Samuel Morse. These discoveries included that of a German physicist, Samuel von Somering, who made a similar electrolytic telegraph, which operated over a distance of 3 kilometers and required 35 wires, and the similar system of England's Francis Ronalds in 1816, who modified the system to only use two wires. Danish physicist Hans Ørsted found in 1820 that an electric current flowing along a wire deflected a magnetic needle placed nearby. By 1835, Joseph Henry had made an experimental telegraph using pulses of electricity to represent coded letters. The pulses caused a piece of iron to click as it responded to an electromagnet at the receiver. Further expanding on Ørsted's discovery, Russian inventor Pavel Schilling created the first magnetized needle telegraph. After seeing Schilling's demonstration, German physicists Carl Gauss and Wilhelm Weber expanded the idea when they used a two-wire, single-needle telegraph to send messages over 3 kilometers. The telegraph continued to create an interest among scientists, and in 1837, English physicists William Cooke and Charles Wheatstone patented a needle telegraph that used 5 needles and required 6 wires. This telegraph was installed along 13 miles of the Great Western Railway in 1838. After making adjustments and reducing the number of wires to 3, by 1845 they had simplified the receiver so that only 1 needle was required. By 1852, nearly 4,040 miles of Britain's railroads were equipped with telegraphic communications. The Cooke-Wheatstone telegraph was the first practical use of electricity for long-distance communication. Samuel Morse was an artist, photographer, inventor, politician, and businessman. As a young man, Morse studied art in London and later returned to the United States due to lack of funds to continue studying abroad. While back home, Morse began a career as a portrait artist, painting the likes of President Monroe in 1819 and the House of Representatives in 1822. As an inventor, Morse invented a pump for fire engines and a machine to cut marble statues mechanically. While these things were not successful, Morse continued to dab in the invention process. In the early 1830s, Morse became interested in communicating instantly over long distances. 2 personal experiences promoted Morse's interest, and they included the time when, as a young man, he arrived in Europe to study art and wrote a letter to his mother to inform her of his safe arrival. However, his mother received the letter a month later. The second experience occurred when his wife, Lucretia, died in 1825 and Morse was in Washington, D.C. It took 6 days for him to receive the news. In 1837, Samuel Morse decided to actively pursue invention as his career. Because he wasn't a scientist, he had to refer to notebooks he had kept from years earlier to decide where he should begin. Morse had much difficulty because he was not well versed on electrical theory and he was not a strong mechanic or engineer. For these reasons, Morse asked Dr. Leonard Gale, a geologist, for help. Dr. Gale agreed and became Morse's partner in the telegraph project, putting Morse in touch with Joseph Henry, a pioneer researcher in electromagnetism. Samuel Morse did have a special ability, however, and that was the ability to improvise with materials on hand. Since his brother was a printer, Morse had become familiar with the tools of the trade. This knowledge of printing materials, coupled with the knowledge gained from Gale and Henry, provided a background which allowed Morse to create his electric telegraph. Alfred Vail, a skilled mechanic and student at New York University, became interested in Morse's telegraph, and, in exchange for a 1/4 share of future profits, agreed to build an improved telegraph. In 1840, Morse acquired a patent for his telegraph and hoped the federal government would buy the patent and set up a national telegraph system. Morse felt the telegraph could benefit all Americans, much like the postal system, canals, and national roads. In March 1843, Congress agreed to appropriate $30,000 to the further development of the telegraph. Morse and Vail continued to improve the telegraph and built a telegraph line from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, Maryland. The line was completed in 1844. It was across this line that the first official message was sent via telegraph, and it read, "What hath God wrought?" This message was written in Morse code, a code of dots